This isn't a legend to me anymore. In that forest, something laughed, and every footprint it left pointed back at me. Tonight we step into a sacred Brazilian forest. I will show you backward footprints that lead you deeper when you think you're going home, a creek that sings on the wrong side of the trail, bark that closes like skin over a fresh cut, and the single mistake that almost kept me there forever. If true scary stories and folklore get under your skin, subscribe and ring the bell. There are more nightmares waiting in the trees. In Brazil, the forest is older than names. People speak of Curupira, not like a distant myth but like a neighbor you must greet and never mock. He has hair like embers and feet turned backward. He does not chase, he misleads. Hunters who take for sport, travelers who whistle after dusk, the careless who carve their initials into bark, they follow his prints deeper and deeper until the creek sings on the wrong side and the sun forgets what hour it is. Rules grow like roots: don't whistle after dusk, don't slice the bark, don't take more than you need. Break them, and the forest answers in circles. Tell me in the comments if you have ever seen a print that felt wrong or walked a path that brought you back without turning. Your story might appear in a future episode. I grew up near a tongue of Atlantic forest that always smelled like wet stone and sweet rot, a kind of old sweetness you can taste at the back of the throat. My grandmother kept a string of rules for the woods. She never called them rules. She would say, "That's how we behave in someone else's house." She meant the forest. I left home after school, but last July a small conservation group asked if I could help check illegal traps and camera posts on the ridge. 2 days, they said. In and out. They needed an extra pair of careful hands, someone who knew the old paths and could move quietly. I said yes because I wanted to be helpful, and because I missed the sound of water talking its way around stones. We started before sunrise. The air was cold enough to lift the hairs on my arms. By the time the canopy turned green and gold, we had already found 2 loops of snare wire cut clean through and an open camera housing hanging like an empty mouth. Inside, nothing, not even a chewed plastic frame. Not stolen, I told myself. Collected. As if someone didn't want the forest to be watched. At a kapok tree that leans like a crooked tooth over the trail, we split to cover more ground. I took the route that follows the creek, because that path is the one I knew best, the same one I had walked as a kid when my grandmother taught me not to shout and not to spit and not to break a branch just to hear it snap. The clay under the leaves had the same soft give I remembered. Every step peeled the ground open like a scab. I hate that sound. It feels like the earth complaining. The whistle slid behind my ear like a wet finger. One note. Not a bird I recognized. Not wind. Not a human voice, exactly. I spun, expecting to see one of my partners grinning with a leaf between their thumbs, but the trail behind me was empty and the leaves had gone still, as if listening for what I would do next. "Okay," I said into the green. "I'm not here to take. I'm looking and leaving." The forest answered with the ordinary things: drips, a thin insect, the gossip of water on stone. 10 minutes later, the ordinary ended. A small bare footprint pressed into red clay held a puddle in the arch like a cupped hand. The edges were crisp, the clay was warm where my shadow fell. A second print stepped away from me into the green. I crouched and touched the first one and tried to name the feeling that rose. Not fear yet. Something older, like that moment before you insult a host by accident. I followed because I wanted to see where it led, and because I have always had the ugly reflex to prove to myself that a strange thing is not, in fact, strange. The creek's voice to my right began to thin, the way a radio station thins when you're almost out of range. The smell of guava somewhere far off stained the air. A dragonfly passed low and left a cool line against my shin. I walked 5 lengths of the body and came to the fork where the kapok leans, and that was wrong because I was sure I had not turned. I stood there frowning at a tree I knew too well and did not, at that moment, recognize. I looked down to be certain my eyes weren't lying and saw what I had missed before: the toes on each print faced me. As I moved forward, the feet pointed back. I wasn't tracking anyone. Something was leading me and laughing as it walked away. You can tell yourself a lot of clever things in daylight. You can say someone walked the trail backward in bare feet as a prank. You can say the clay holds heat and that's why the prints felt warm. You can say you misremembered which side the creek should be on, that you turned without noticing. But the body keeps a different truth, a private memory inside the bones, and mine remembered a rule, not a reason. If the forest starts repeating, turn back before you believe the repetition is the only honest road. I turned back. The path looked right for 10 steps, then the light changed and the creek song moved to the wrong side again. I scraped a small line into the bark of a palm with the tip of my pocketknife to mark my passing, a childish, stubborn act I knew was wrong the moment I did it. 3 turns later, the cut had become a faint seam, like skin closing over a shallow wound. I couldn't find the white wetness of a fresh slice. The tree had decided not to remember me. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, because my grandmother's voice had risen inside me the way a hand rises to block a blow. For the cut. For the wire. For the cameras. I'll leave them behind. My voice sounded too large in my own ears, the leaves around me absorbed it instead of throwing it back. A red flare moved between the trunks. Not a full body, not a face, not the safe certainty of a person. Just the suggestion of hair like light broken into embers. A heel soft where a heel should be hard. The impression of 2 small feet set the wrong way around. It felt like a laugh made visible, quick, sideways, already gone. I emptied my side pouch onto a flat rock, the little coil of twine I kept for repairs, 2 waterproof matches, and a wrapped square of guava candy I'd been saving for later. It felt foolish to make an offering, it felt exactly right. A single whistle circled the rock once, then again the other way, like someone walking around the table to see what had been served. There are rules people say keep you alive. Don't hunt for sport. Don't whistle to see who answers. Don't carve the bark because a forest is not a notebook, it is a body. If the path repeats, turn back. If the creek sings from the wrong place, trust your confusion more than your stubbornness. If you see backward footprints, step into them in reverse, match your heel to the ball of the foot, your ball to the heel, and let the forest walk you out. Simple rules, but rules are ropes. You grab them because you don't want to float away. The path did not want me to leave. I followed my own idea of escape and landed in the same bend again, the same light broken in the same way, the same green bruised at the edges like old fruit. I tried to cut a snare line I found tied to a sapling, fresh wire, oiled so it wouldn't rust in the wet, anyway because the wire looked like a mouth waiting to bite a hidden ankle. The sapling gave a sigh. The air gave another. Behind me, on the rock where my small gift lay, the twine I'd offered was no longer there. It had slipped from the stone as if lifted by small clever fingers. I looked up with the taste of iron on my tongue and the certain knowledge that I had failed a test. The red flare of hair flickered and stilled. The space behind a trunk felt occupied by a grin. The laugh that slid between leaves had teeth, not cruel, exactly. Mischief with bite. Past 2 in the afternoon the light soured toward evening. My compass needle began to vibrate in tiny stutters that made me think of a carpenter's hands after a long day. The creek's voice moved until I heard it both behind and ahead at once. I took a breath the way you do before stepping into cold water and did the thing my grandmother had taught me when I was too small to understand the rule but old enough to copy the action. I walked backward into the prints. It is hard to step backward in confidence when every animal left in your brain insists on running. Heel into the print's soft ball, ball into the print's soft heel, toe lifting last like an apology. The clay felt warm through the leather. I paced myself with my breath and promised out loud that I would not cut and would not take and would not raise my voice again inside someone else's house. The trees held still and listened. When I slipped and caught myself on a low branch, it did not break. It flexed and let me go. The forest tightened like a loop of rope does when someone pulls from both ends. Landmarks slid out of themselves and back in. A fallen trunk I thought I recognized reappeared with a new angle as if it had never fallen at all. Somewhere to my left a monkey coughed and then repeated the cough from a new place, and then a third time from behind my right shoulder in a perfect imitation of my memory. The sound of water hopped from rock to rock without moving in the stream, the way laughter hops from person to person across a room. I told the face I could not see, I won't whistle, and it made me a promise in return that I could hear only as an easing in the air. I don't know when I realized the forest was teaching me to step the way it wanted me to step. I only know that when the prints widened, I widened my stance, and when they narrowed I tightened mine, until I was walking the way a person walks who didn't want to be found by a pair of human eyes, sideways, smooth, leaving almost nothing to read. I knew, without seeing him full on, that Curupira watched me and that the laughter had flattened into a grin of approval. The trees opened onto a strip of gravel. Color drained from me so quickly I had to put my hand on my knee and breathe 3 slow breaths. I set my right foot toward the road and the gravel rippled like water where there was no water. Heat shimmered at ankle height when the air was cool. It was an exit drawn on the air, and I had almost stepped into a picture of home. I stopped with my foot hanging stupidly above the false road. From the left, the red flare hovered and tilted like a head. "Not that way," I said. The voice that came out of me this time sounded like mine again. I had one thing left that felt like mine, my pocket knife. I opened it and laid it on the damp ground with the care you use to put a sleeping child down. "No more cuts," I said, not just to the wire but to the bark and to the 1,000 small wounds made by people who moved through a place and claimed they were never there. Wind moved through the kapok like a satisfied breath, rustling only the leaves it needed to touch to show me that it had heard. The laugh stepped backward into the trees. The prints ahead of me cooled. I kept stepping into them in reverse, heel against ball against heel, long stupid body learning the small body's trick. The creek's voice returned to my right and stayed there. The light stopped bruising itself and went clean and green. The kapok leaned the way I remembered and did not move. When I passed the palm I had cut, the seam in the bark was still faintly visible, but it was a seam now, not a wound. A very old idea in me relaxed, a rule followed as a door opening. At the trailhead I sat on the truck's bumper and laced my fingers together so they would stop shaking. When I pulled off my right boot, a small dark seed fell to the dust. It was tied to my lace with a knot I could not make again if you paid me, a practical, beautiful knot that gathered the world's patience into one tight loop. It smelled faintly of smoke and sugar, like something cooked close to a fire and saved for the right person. I kept the seed because throwing it away felt like tossing a handshake into the trash. That night I dreamed the forest reached the city like a tide that refuses to respect a wall. I woke to a ghost of green smell in my apartment, an echo of wet stone, a sense that if I left my window unlatched long enough, something old would step in to count my breaths, not to steal them but to remind me I had taken too many deep ones for granted. I put the seed into a small jar and set it on the windowsill where the afternoon light kisses the glass. Some evenings the jar fogs from the inside and clears when I say out loud that I remember my grandmother's rules. On those nights, if the wind lines up right in the alley, I hear one soft whistle. I answer once, and never after dark. If this story found its way under your skin, like the video so the warning can travel farther through the trees. In some forests the dark wears boots, in Brazil it wears bare feet turned the wrong way. Want more? Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new horror story.